All right, let's kick this thing off. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get things rolling right now. So excited to have everybody and to have the opportunity to talk about today's topic, which is sales methodology. And it seems more and more companies are implementing or considering implementing a common sales methodology. So this should be really interesting. We're excited about the topic and looking forward to the conversation. And that leads to the objective for today's session. The objective here is really to help all of you determine if you should implement a methodology, when you should implement a methodology, and if you do, how to go about it in order to deliver the best possible business outcomes. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you've never attended an Axiom webinar, I'll make this clear at the beginning. It's worth noting that this is not an Axiom commercial, so we will not be talking about Axiom's methodology, Axiom's products and services here. This is designed to be helpful, irrespective of the decisions that you make, help you decide what's best for your organization. There'll be time at the end, and we'll drop a link if you want to connect with us to talk more about Axiom. But the purpose here is to help you make the best decision possible for your business. Before we get into the agenda, we'll take a couple of minutes, just some quick introductions. My name is Bob Sanders. I'll be the host today. I'm also the managing partner at Axiom Sales Kinetics. I've got approximately 30 years experience helping companies of varying sizes and in different businesses to implement sales methodologies and select the methodologies that are best for them. Excuse me, my guest today is one of the most capable sales enablement and revenue ops leaders I know. He's also my good friend, Ray Bonis. Welcome, Ray. Ray is a servant leader and passionate coach with extensive global experience helping sales teams execute more effectively. He and his teams have closed hundreds of millions of dollars. He's probably blushing now as I go through some of this, but in highly competitive sales environments. Ray's got a lot of experience selling a variety of solutions, from sales enablement solutions to SaaS products and services to CPG solutions to technology, to both small and medium-sized businesses all the way up to Fortune 100 companies. And he's actually sold and or worked with teams in every continent except one. Apparently, he's banned from Antarctica for some reason. Now, by the way, Ray and I have been friends for many, many years, so I'm going to let you in on a secret most people don't know. Ray's got this reputation of having impeccable integrity, but I happen to know for a fact that if you offer him a Starbucks, you can get almost anything you want from him. So Ray resides in Central Florida with his wife, Wanda, son, Christian, and Nina the dog. Ray, welcome. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Bob. Glad to be here. Appreciate the time.
So our objective, again, help you determine if, when, and how to effectively implement a sales methodology. We've only got 45 minutes for today's topic. So we've got a pretty tight, pretty packed agenda. I'll just go through real quickly how we're going to cover this. First thing we're going to talk about today is the difference between methodology and process. Not so much that we want to get hung up on the terms. We want to make certain we're all aligned on what we're actually talking about during our conversation today. We'll also talk about how you determine when it's right time to implement a sales methodology inside your organization. We'll talk about how you could go about selecting which option is best for you and your organization, and then how to activate that inside your business. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. In order to be as effective as possible today, we've got a couple of poll questions that'll help us get a good sense of you as an audience and where you all are. So I'm going to pop up the first one for you, and it's actually a two-part poll. The first part is, will you be implementing a new methodology within the next 24 months? And there are a couple of different choices there. And then what's the size of your team? That'll help us make certain that we get this focused as much as possible on all of you and where you're at. So we'll give you just a minute to find that and complete the poll. Give you a couple of more minutes here. Well, not minutes, but seconds. So if you can, just go in and complete where you are. All right, it looks like as of right now, We've got a couple of people looking to relaunch their methodology, some with a combination of relaunching and implementing a new one, some that aren't certain yet. And we've got a good chunk of the people are actually less than 50 people in the organization. And we've got one that's got over 100 to 500. So excellent. That helps us keep track of who we're talking to today, and help make this as productive as possible for all of you. So with that, let's move into the first agenda item, which is to talk about the difference between these two terms, sales process and sales methodology. And Ray, if it's okay, I'll take the first pass at process. When we talk about sales process, here's what we mean. These are the steps that an organization goes through in order to move somebody from being a prospect to being a customer. So when you talk about process, you're typically going to hear terms like stages and gates. You're going to hear about it mirroring the buyer's journey. And it's going to be things like prospecting, qualifying, presenting, negotiating, and piloting. But it is the what you do, not the how you do it. Does that make sense? And then we talk about methodology, Ray. How do you think about methodology?
So as I look at our organization, you cleared it up pretty well. The process is everything from marketing, getting us MQLs, all the way order to cash, if you will, and everything in between. The sales methodology, we get very specific in terms of the motion and how we make that selling motion happen. So from our perspective, I think you mentioned things like prospecting, qualifying, presenting, handling objections. That's the methodology of how we do the things that lead to the overarching success of the sales process, because the sales process is more than just selling. It involves lots of other moving parts and pieces. The sales methodology, we get very myopic about our sales professionals and how they do things and how the sales leaders coach.
Yeah, that makes great sense. And so you'll hear some of the same terms, right? Prospecting can be a stage, qualifying can be a stage in the process, but the how you engage with a customer is a part of the methodology. And what we're focused on today isn't whether or not a methodology exists. There are obviously ways that people prospect and ways that people qualify in pretty much every business. The question that we're going to talk through today is, should there be a common methodology by which everyone in the organization engages with prospects, engages with customers, right? And if so, how do you go about actually activating that as effectively as you possibly can? Make sense? So we're going to start by talking about the need to do it. When is the right time to select and activate a methodology, and when should we not do it? So before we do that, I'm going to go back to those of you that actually said that you are looking at implementing a methodology. I'm going to throw one more poll question up for everybody, and that is about why it is that you feel like you want to implement a methodology. So let me go back to that one, and I'll just launch it on the screen for you. So if you are in fact looking at implementing a methodology, what are the things that you hope that will deliver to your business? And you've got a couple of seconds here to pick as many of these as you want. And as you would expect, a lot of decisions, a lot of people are focused on the revenue impact, right? Is it going to help us sell more? Is it going to help us do that at higher margins? So that makes sense. And that's certainly one of the primary reasons why people would go about implementing methodology. I think it's also interesting here that 60% of the people said that increasing customer satisfaction is a part of why they do that. I know, Ray, you've implemented methodologies multiple times in the past. So if you would, why don't you start by talking about, in your experience, the things that compelled you and the organizations that you were with to want to implement a common methodology in the first place?
So I think part of it is growth, and growth can either be you've got companies, and there's probably people that are represented here today that are saying, well, we're growing already, as we were, even in my most recent company at Thryv, we were growing very well prior to us implementing any sales methodology, but it wasn't as predictable as we'd wanted it to be because everybody wasn't speaking the same language and doing the same thing. So you had I would almost say in some cases, at many companies, you have growth in spite of what you're doing, which is good, but it's not predictable. So
Sure.
we want that to be predictable to make sure that we can forecast, because we're a publicly traded company. I don't know about the other companies represented here, but we're a publicly traded company. That's very important to the analysts, to the shareholders, to the people that we want to come in and do that. So it also allows us, as you have here, to scale better. We want to figure out where we need to invest the resources, into what areas, and by implementing that very, we call it a very logical, repeatable process and structure, where everybody's doing the same thing. For us, it's a DNA thing. We want everybody speaking the same language, saying the same things, doing the same things, and not just for sales, by the way. And I probably should have clarified that, because for us, sales methodology goes across divisions. We have marketing, we have finance, we have customer success, we have customer support, we have post sales, all doing the same thing, speaking the same language, so we can scale effectively and make sure that what we're selling is healthy. We want to protect our margins. And an example of that is what we see. There's almost an immediate decrease in, we're a SaaS platform. So post implementation across each group, we see the same exact thing. We have empirical data that shows us, Bob. I don't want to go off track too much, but we see that our big three metrics are number of demos scheduled, number of demos completed, number of closed won deals from that, right, on the SaaS. And that's pretty consistent across SaaS platforms. So what we see in terms of protecting the margins and growth is we see the number go down in terms of scheduled, the number go down in terms of completed, but the number of sales going up. And what that indicates to us is, out of the gate, they're qualifying better. They're disqualifying more. So we're getting less on the front end, but we're getting higher sales. And then the cool thing is, over several months, all those metrics start to go back up again. So we protect the margins. We make sure everybody's speaking the same language, because we do team selling it at Thryv. We have a field sales force that goes out and tees everything up. Then it comes inside to a demo team, who then does the demonstration to try to get the person to actually buy that. And then it helps down the road, because in the SaaS world, churn is the dirty word. You don't want churn. You don't want people leaving or deleting that app and not using it. So this really does, over the entire life of the client journey, make it logical and repeatable for us.
Yeah, and so it sounds like in an organization like yours, you can't scale the growth by simply hiring people who have figured out how to sell successfully on their own, because you can't get the teams working well together. You can't ensure the highest level of customer satisfaction if everybody does it their own way.
No, and that's the biggest thing is there are those mythical unicorns that are those A+ players. They're not coming to work for most of our companies. They're going in a sales gig where they're going to make the highest possible dollars. And I have a friend who's like that, Bob. He makes 7 figures in a sales job. It's amazing to me. And I've met 5 of him in my entire life.
Right.
And those are the guys that, there's only 1 or 2 Tom Brady's on the planet. And even Tom Brady doesn't get to go out and do anything he wants.
Right.
Well, he's retired now, so he can do anything he wants today. But you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's interesting, and it makes perfect sense. There are some compelling reasons to do this, right? It can help teams operate more efficiently, can absolutely drive up revenue and margins and make that more predictable. You would think then that everybody should implement a sales methodology right away. And in fact, that's really not the case. And I know you've had some experience with this too, Ray. I was talking, in fact, with a startup technology company just the other day, and they were interested in implementing a common methodology for selling. Now, keep in mind, there isn't anybody selling except the founder yet. And they were interested in implementing a common methodology. There are times when the right answer to a common approach is not never, but not now. And the first one is if it's too early. If as an early stage company, you haven't really figured out the sales motion yet, you can't really scale that across a team. So it's important to take the time to understand what your value is in the marketplace, how customers evaluate you, before you try to define and implement a common methodology. I think the other thing that we've seen with organizations multiple times in the past is you've got people at the ground level, so maybe first level salespeople, sales managers, maybe in the next level, who believe that they need a common approach, but senior leadership doesn't buy in yet. And if senior leadership doesn't buy in, then it's going to be really difficult to implement sales methodology effectively. Wouldn't you think, Ray?
I think that for us has been one of the key things across multiple companies I've done this in. So if you don't have the executive buy-in, and not just nodding the head saying, yes, we recognize we have to do this, but presented with, here's a plan, here's how we're going to roll this out, here's what we expect from it, will you support this? If they're not going to do that, I would tell everybody, I think Axiom is fantastic. Well, it's not a commercial for them, I'll tell you they're great, but I wouldn't spend a penny on it.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a complete and utter waste of time.
Yeah, and it's not just supporting it, it's also accepting responsibility for communicating in a way that's consistent with the methodology too. Understanding the terms and definitions, understanding what the methodology is so that they can reinforce it. I think the other two things that would cause us to suggest that a company wait on implementing a common methodology is, first, if you haven't figured out your differentiation. Methodologies generally don't turn salespeople into alchemists. They cannot turn a bad product into a good product. They can't make a bad offering really compelling in the marketplace, at least not in any kind of sustainable way. What you'll have is you'll have a whole lot of unhappy customers and a whole lot of, if it's SaaS, for example, a lot of cancellations, right? And it ends up being more costly than it's worth. The other thing is, and this is one that we won't spend a ton of time on today, maybe a good topic for the future, is a lot of times companies think that they should implement sales methodology because they don't have enough in the pipeline. You mentioned earlier, Ray, about your conversion metric being the thing that you were focused on when you implemented your most recent methodology. It's important to understand that the environment in which people sell has largely changed. And there was a time not that long ago when if you wanted to drive significantly more activity in the pipeline, you would hire more salespeople and implement a common selling methodology. But that generally isn't the case today. Now, there are exceptions, but for the most part, if you can't fill a pipeline based on your marketing efforts, probably not ready to expand the team, probably not ready to implement a common selling methodology. It's probably not going to be as effective as it might otherwise be. Make sense? All right, so once we figured out that we want to implement a methodology, now what we have to do is select the common selling methodology that can help drive the best business outcomes. So if you're at a point where you're doing this, you might be thinking selecting a partner, but you might also be thinking about building your own methodology. And the question here is, how do you know what the right methodology is? What's really going to work best in your organization? And there are a number of things on the screen. And Ray, if it's okay with you, I'll let you take the first pass. The one point I'll make here is they're not all the same. You can create different methodologies. You can partner with companies to get methodologies, but there are differences in the methodologies that you might create and the methodologies that you might choose to implement. So let's just talk through a few of those, Ray, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest one is making sure that it's not conceptual. There's some sales. There's lots of sales training companies. If you Google the term sales training, you're going to get 1 billion responses. And there's some amazing marketing firms and engines behind those companies that, and we've all heard them. We could all name names. Not going to do that. But the big thing is what we find is when we get into the crux of it and find out does it work. A lot of times the answer is no. It looks really cool and it sounds really cool, but it's more of a conceptual selling or a strategic selling than an actual tactical, how do I do it, prescriptive, go do these 3 things. It should be, I don't use this word lightly, I think it should be very scientific. You talk to sales professionals, they say, well, selling is an art, and I couldn't disagree more. I think the way you do your, I've been in sales my whole life, the way Ray does it versus the way Bob does it, that's the art and the difference. But I want to use a very specific, logical, repeatable process. There's not 10 ways to swing a golf club. If your club face is closed, you can be the most artistic guy in the world, and it's going to go off to the direction you don't want it to go, and you hit the ball. So it's got to be something that actually works. Yeah. And we want to make sure when our people use it, do they have a path to success? Is there a path to proficiency that allows them to get good at this and allows them to win more deals? And the big thing for us was, does this align across the entire customer journey? So from marketing, finding the lead, to implementing this sale with a customer, does this align across our customer journey and bring value at every single step of the value chain from inception to the customer using our Thryv software. And that was critical for us.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to me that one of the things that I've seen over the years is, and we talked about this at the very beginning with the first poll question, the reason companies begin the journey of evaluating a sales methodology, selecting one and implementing one is oftentimes revenue. And they think really in terms of, is it going to help us sell more, which is obviously important, right? It's the number 2 bullet on here. What they don't think of is, what is their selling philosophy, right? What do they want the experience to be for people from the first time they meet with or come in contact with a company until hopefully they're raving fans of the company? And so they don't necessarily approach the methodologies looking to see how well does it align with their philosophy of doing business, with how they want to engage their customers. And I think that's really important part of it too. The other one that stands out for me, and it's a little bit difficult to communicate, actually, it's this last bullet on here, but is it easy enough that somebody can get good at something quickly and begin to get value out of it? But also, is it powerful enough that as they get better, they get more value? Because what happens when you implement a methodology, and we'll talk about this here in a minute around how to activate it in the business, is sometimes we implement things that are so simple that people learn them right quick. They get good at it right away. A lot of times, by the way, this happens when the methodology is highly scripted conversation, right? It's fairly short sales cycle, very highly scripted. People get good at the script, but they are only good enough when the script actually applies. If they have to go off the script, if they have to deal with, if they have to leverage it in different environments or with different kinds of buyers, then it starts to break down for them. So it's important in evaluating methodology to get one that delivers value right away, but creates a path, as you mentioned before, where people can get more proficient over time. And in that way, they continually get value, and they have a built-in incentive to get better and better at it. It doesn't simply become a quick, flavor of the month. You did a class on it, and then it's gone, and everybody forgets it, moves on to something else. Anything else there, Ray?
No, I think that's a lot of it. I think that's going to be key, and I'm really excited to talk about the next one, how you evaluate these options and alternatives.
Let's talk about that. So let's talk about how you go about actually evaluating. So you know what you want to accomplish, right? You want a common approach to how you engage with customers, how you forecast, how you manage the sales function in the business. How do you figure out which one's best, though?
Yeah, for us, those last 2 are critical. I think the rest are kind of table stakes. You're going to have references. You're going to have success cases. You're going to, I do think it's very important to review both as the learner and as the buyer. That is important as well. But for us, because we've done this now several times, is how is it going to be implemented? And then what happens after the fact? Because we have to make sure that not only do they get good, as you said today, but is there a path, we call it a path to proficiency? Is there an ongoing persistent reinforcement model that allows them in bite-sized chunks literally for us, every week to get better at something? And so the critical piece is, how are we going to implement this? And then once it's implemented, a lot of companies just walk away.
Right.
That's no bueno for us. What we want to know is, okay, how are you going to partner with us to ensure that ongoing, there's not just a call us when you want to buy something else. Well, we spent a lot of money on this. You're investing a significant amount of money in the sales methodology. We can't have a once and done. And the answer can't always be, we're not big fans of the older, I'll call it an older school model, if you will, of sending everybody off to a class, and they're in class for 4 days, and then they go do their thing. And because what happens is we bring you back the next sales kickoff a year later, and we get some bump and then down, and then some bump and then down, and some bump and down. We're looking for more of this over time. So it's critical that partnering approach creates a persistent model that allows us to be successful ongoing and over time. And you can't separate the 2 of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. Quick reminder, by the way, for everybody, you can ask your questions at any point by clicking on the question button, and you can post them in the question section in the webinar, and we'll get to those here in just a minute. So really good points, Ray. I think that the other thing that stands out to me is oftentimes people assume that the methodologies are all going to be the same and they just focus on how it's going to be implemented. And they don't actually take the time to really consider whether or not there is a difference and what would make one actually better for them, and develop criteria and analyze that, right? So I think it's helpful for people to not only see it as their sellers might see it, but also to experience it. If you want to know how a given methodology is going to make your customers feel, talk to the people who sell that methodology. You should, you would think, get a good sense of what the methodology would be like, so that you actually get a feel for what differentiates one from the others by how you're actually engaging with the people that represent those companies. So that's another way that you can go about evaluating the methodology part. But to your point, Ray, without implementation that actually works, it won't matter how good the methodology is, because nobody's going to get good at it anyway. So that's a great segue to our next topic. How do we go about activating the methodology in the most effective manner possible? So remember, our definition of methodology is the models within the steps in the process. It's the models for how we do things, like how we go about qualifying our opportunities, how we manage opportunities and forecast them, how we handle customer concerns, how we present recommendations. So it's within the process, it's the how do we actually go execute. And that means that when we talk about activating effectively, our goal, if you will, is to try to get as many people as proficient as we can with the skill and knowledge necessary to execute the methodology as effectively as they can. So we've got 6 items to cover here. And if it's okay with you, Ray, I'm going to hit the first 2 real quickly, and then I'll give you the next 4. Does that work?
Sure.
So as we talk about implementing the methodology inside a business, or activating the methodology inside the business, 2 things that I want to stress. First is it's important to treat it as a change initiative. And second, as a part of that is coaching becomes a really important focal point for any methodology that you implement. And I'm going to start with a little diagram here, and hate to do this. I didn't build the diagram out the way I probably should have. So I'm going to ask everybody to focus your attention on the inner ring here. And I'd like you to think about what an individual goes through in order to make a change of some sort in his or her life. And the first thing is they have to believe the change is in their best interest. In the case of a sales methodology, I have to believe as the seller that if I sell this way, it will be better for me, better for my family, better for my prospects and customers, and better for my company. If I don't believe it, then probably not going to do it. Once I believe it, then I'm willing to make a commitment to develop the skill and knowledge necessary to execute the methodology. Once I do that, then as I build the skill and knowledge, I can begin to implement those behaviors into what I do. Once I start seeing results from the behaviors, that feeds my belief and reinforces it. And that starts to reinforce the cycle that causes me to then want to do the next thing and the next thing. So that's how the change happens. So as an organization, what does the company have to do in order to support the change? And Ray, you alluded to this a minute ago. It used to be that the way you would implement a sales methodology is you would take everybody out of the field, drop them into a sales training class, and teach them what the methodology is. The reality is that nearly any methodology a company would implement today has much more to learn and much more graduated levels of proficiency in order to deliver the maximum value than you can actually do in a training class anyway. So the purpose of training, and this you can do programmatically, is to get people to buy in, to give them the opportunity to see what you're doing and why you're doing it so that they can make a choice. Once they make a choice, then you can support the choice with the kinds of things that can be used to reinforce the learning and allow them to get better at it over time. Then you can use coaching to help identify the specific areas where each person has an opportunity to improve and to recognize where people are really doing it well. And ultimately, you can use rewards to help deepen that belief and commitment and continue the cycle. And one thing I want to stress here is we talk about this, coaching ends up being the real critical pivot point in all of this. Without coaching, you do all the other stuff well and still not get the full benefit of the investment that you're making. And I'll just give a quick example of this before we move on to the other items on the list. We have an example here that I'm going to show you is actually a single company that had at the time, I want to say 12 to 15 offices, right? And they had most of the offices did not implement a coaching model, but a couple of them did. And where there was no coaching, the company had very high turnover in the sales team, more than 60%. Less, as you can imagine, it's because less than half the people were making their quota. There was also, this was in a technology where there was a fee charged to implement it. They were waiving the fees, and all those markets were losing money. The markets that were coaching consistently as a part of the methodology implementation, as a part of that initiative, the companies that were doing that, or the offices that were doing that, had less than 20% turnover, had 100% of the teams making their number, and they were collecting the fees everybody else was waiving to the tune of $1.2 million a year, and they were the first to profitability. So just that one thing, it was the same methodology delivered by the same partner, and in fact, the exact same people in the same way. The difference is coaching, and it can make a huge impact. And I know, Ray, you've seen that too in your experience with a couple of organizations, what a difference coaching can make.
Yeah, I would say for us, that's the number one thing. And for anybody considering this, if you're not going to invest in coaching, I wouldn't spend a penny on a sales methodology, because you're going to have the typical folks that like to jump in and get involved in stuff like that and do it well, that are going to do that. And then everybody else is going to go back to doing what they think is in their best interests. So we have heavily invested in coaching resources. We literally have 10, we call them sales effectiveness coaches, 10 sales effectiveness coaches that are dedicated to, they're not trainers. They don't train. They are coaches. It's like an offensive line coach, a defensive line coach, a special teams coach, a kicking coach, a quarterback coach. They get very specific with our sales reps and coach, which takes us into things that are going to make us more successful by doing that. So yeah, I think that's key.
Yeah.
I would also say something that we've done is really brand it. We don't call it truth in lending. Obviously, I think Bob said it. We're a customer, so we use Axiom Sales Kinetics. We don't call it Axiom. We call it selling the Thryv way. We call it coaching the Thryv way. Andy, I'm going to answer your question because it ties into this. You said, do you think that sales methodology should be different for each sales role, like SDRs, SEs, AEs? I'm going to say a qualified no, and here's why. I think it should be modularized. I think that's the key to success, is making it modularized, because we have selling the Thryv way for marketing, selling the Thryv way for customer success, selling the Thryv way for monetization, our post-sales upselling, selling the Thryv way for SDRs, selling the Thryv way for demo reps. But the base core language, we're all speaking English. So we're not teaching one group English, one group French, one group German, one group Russian. Everybody speaks English. Everybody speaks selling the Thryv. We modularized it down to selling the Thryv way for the executive team, where we're taking our executive committee, all our C-levels, through the same thing, but a much smaller process, because they don't have time to go through 6-week certification, which is ours, not Axiom. So making that the language that they speak and branding it, because here's the thing: at the end of the day, you could have XYZ company and a veteran sales rep at XYZ company could say, well, Axiom's not really my thing. It's very difficult for somebody at our company to say, I'm not going to sell the Thryv way. That makes a big difference. And then we make it every day. It's just not part. It's part of our normal DNA. So that it's not it says here on this slide, I think, normal workflow. The abnormal thing at our company would be to not do this. It's just not optional. And then you want to make it's no different than frictionless payments. When you take your phone and you tap the box, that's a frictionless payment. We want to make learning as frictionless as possible. So we have and work with Axiom to get it into very short, digestible chunks of information. There's no more 4-day classes. It's tops as they go through certification. We're talking maybe our guys take an hour and a half a week, and that could be 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. And then the big thing, Bob, and I'll shut up, I promise. You just got on my happy slide. The big thing here is measure. we can tell you that post sales, we've had an initial jump of a 57% increase in closing ratios. That normalizes because that's world class. I mean, if you can get more than 1 out of every 2 sales closed, you'd pay Axiom anything they'd ask you. And we do, by the way, because they do. But we see significant measurable results that lead to the upward trend that make our shareholders happy. And then we reward for doing that. We make sure that we celebrate everything. And here's the important thing that we had to learn a very difficult lesson on, because we invested in this sales methodology and our people would use a piece of it, but they wouldn't use it perfectly. And then we would drop the hammer saying, no, you were supposed to say A, B, C, D, not A, E, D, C. Now, if they just use A and nothing else, we celebrate that because it's better than doing nothing. And it's better than them trying to come up with something on their own. So celebrate the wins and reward them, but measure the heck out of everything, because absent measurable results, it's just hearsay. And then it just comes down to how compelling am I in the discussion with our chief revenue officer versus me being able to hand him a chart saying, here's what these 3 teams just did over the past 90 days as a result of this training.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ray. And I think that's one that, early on in my career, I probably missed often, was celebrating the victories. A lot of times when we implement a methodology and we've defined how we want things done, and I'll actually speak to one of the questions that we have here too. Methodology is the how to do it. So qualifying might be a stage in the sales process. It might be a stage inside your CRM. The conversation around qualifying, so the model for how you learn about somebody's business, the questioning model that you use, the questioning model that you use to define criteria, the model that you use to expand or shape the criteria, those are parts of the methodology. So the process is the steps, the methodology, if you will, is the how you do it. What happens is when you implement the methodology early on, especially if you've got some senior people who have familiarity with it or really took hold of it right away and jumped in, or frankly, some people for whom it was a real natural transition where they were already doing parts of it. Now you've just given them something to call it, a name for how they talk about somebody's business or a name for how they develop criteria. What happens is you tend to see the gaps everywhere. You see where people are falling short of, if the competency model was 1 to 5, you see them falling short, they're at a 2, and you've got a picture in your mind of a 5. And you start to focus so much attention on the gaps that people don't get the opportunity to experience the reward of getting from 0 to 2. And that can be so deflating in the organization that pretty soon the methodology feels like it was designed to be a stick. And that's the last thing you want, right? You want people enthusiastic about getting better at it. And Ray, thank you, because you shared a really important metric. And that was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask you is, what kind of success has the organization actually experienced? And I think that the Thryv example is a really good one of what's possible, the kind of impact you can get with methodology. Before we open up to questions, I'll share one of my other favorites, which is actually from a while back, was Alltel Wireless. And they took a very similar approach to what you've talked about, Ray. They branded it, selling the Alltel way. I think that was their branding. And they built it into their operating procedures. And they had people that would go through and visit all the markets and identify whether or not the managers were coaching. If they were coaching, were they following the right coaching model? Were they identifying opportunities? Were they really contributing to the development of the team and helping them get more proficient with the model? And they got great results. For those that don't know the story of Alltel, Alltel was actually acquired by Verizon Wireless. It was one of the biggest mergers in the industry. This is before T-Mobile and Sprint, and they were doing great. They had a 27% increase in their business channel revenue in 1 year, and the highest average revenue per line that they'd ever had. So you can get these kinds of results that Ray's talking about that I just mentioned when you implement a methodology. What I'd like to do next is really talk about some of your questions and see what we can do to expand on the topic for those of you in the audience. And again, a reminder, you can post your questions by clicking the Q&A button, and we'll open it up to questions here. And also wanted to let you know, we've talked a lot about coaching today. So on this next slide, there is actually a QR code that you can scan. And if you do that, it'll give you access to download a guide to sales coaching. And since what we're talking about here is a change initiative with sales methodology, there's actually at the back of that a coaching readiness assessment for you, where you can use that to evaluate the degree to which your organization is ready from a coaching perspective to implement a sales methodology. Are you there? Do you have some things you need to do in order to shore it up? Because as Ray said, and I mentioned, without coaching, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get the value out of your methodology investment. So first question here, for your most successful clients, how are they ensuring that their sales reps have those bite-sized refreshers and learnings in the flow of their day-to-day work? So I'll start with that one, and then Ray, you can jump on since it says for your most successful clients. So we actually came to this realization with the help of clients, and it started for us about 10 years ago. And what happened was, there's actually, for those of you that are evaluating, that are in the learning and development space, by the way, there's a great book called Telling Training Story by Dr. Robert Brinkerhoff that lays out how to evaluate the effectiveness of any training program. And one of our big clients hired Dr. Brinkerhoff to study their program. We hired the university that he was working at, Western Michigan University, to study our program. And here's what we found, and it speaks to the question that's being asked. Nobody actually was getting good at the methodology by going to the training class. And by the way, the training classes, sometimes they were 2 days. We had classes that were as long as 2 weeks. Still, in fact, even to this day, we don't really have a documented case of somebody going to class and being fully proficient with the methodology when they leave. However, we had always provided reinforcement tools. Back in the early days, going the Wayback Machine, there were audio cassette tapes and workbooks and then CDs. And now it's online learning, right? And it was small bite-sized pieces. We had many people get good who had never been to a class. So our most successful clients are leveraging an online learning library. So the entirety of the methodology is broken down into small bite-sized pieces. Typically, those are 5 to 15 minutes at length. And people are assigned the pieces that are going to be most valuable to them based on the opportunities that they're working. And we can surface those things actually in the coaching conversations as a part of the deals using tools that are embedded in CRM. So we try to surface the need for development as they're working their opportunities, as their managers are having conversations with them, and then reduce the friction, make it as readily accessible to get to that content as we possibly can, as few clicks as possible, so that they can actually get to the learning as quickly as they can. And that's how we're embedding it into their conversations. And we're really working to affect the change where learning and coaching is the normal cadence. Everybody is getting better at something on some regular cadence, whether that's every week or every couple of weeks. Ray, anything I missed there that you want to add?
No, I wouldn't. We utilize the Axiom online learning library. It's all we found it to be very neuroscience based, because we run the gamut at Thryv. So we have some above Gen Z. We have Gen Z. We have our Gen X. Sorry, we have Gen X. We have Gen Z. We have the millennials, and everything in between. And it's very captivating. They can learn anytime, anywhere, on any device. And like I said, I think the word frictionless is a big term that's very important through this process. How do you make it as frictionless as possible for the seller?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are ways to leverage technology to help with that. I can't do a demo or anything like that in the time we've got, but there are ways to do that and to simplify that. Next one, Ray, this is for you. How do you measure the effectiveness of Thryv's methodology for new sellers being onboarded?
So I go back to, for us, it's those 3 metrics. So number of demos scheduled, number of demos completed, number of demos closed. And then another metric is how much faster or slower does it take them to get to scale on those metrics. We have number of Thryvs that they need to sell per month. And we have data that shows reps that aren't utilizing it versus reps that are utilizing it. We can show kind of empirical data as to the speed to lead, if you will. So for us, though, it centers around those 3 key metrics: is how fast we get them to schedule, show, close.
Yeah. That makes sense. Next question is around methodology and process again. Your working methodology, when you're talking about the behaviors that people engage in when they're talking with customers, when they're managing opportunities, when they're building and executing account plans, and you know you're working on methodology if the skill and knowledge necessary to execute becomes a focal point of the conversation. So that's how you know what you're focused on. So once again, on the screen, you have a QR code that you can scan in order to download the coaching guide and a readiness assessment to see where your organization is. I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar, and a special thanks to my good friend, Ray Bonis. Ray, thanks for being here. As I mentioned, if you do want to learn more about Axiom, you can visit us at axiomsales.com, or you can scan the code here. We will have more topics coming up in the future, but we're really grateful that you all joined us today, and we hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.